Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Triangulation, episode 102, recorded May 8th, 2013. Adam Carolla. It's time for Triangulation, the show we do every week where we get to interview the most interesting people online, find out what they're up to. Here's the guy who created Mangria today on the show. I'm really pleased to have Adam Carolla. I almost want to say my old friend Adam Carolla. We've worked together a few times before, and I just always enjoy it. Adam is the holder of the Guinness Book of World Records for the most downloaded podcast, taking that title from Ricky Gervais. Over a 2-year period, something like 59 million downloads. He has become, in many, I think in many minds, the podcaster. Adam Carolla, good to see you.
Thanks, Leo. That's high praise coming from who I think is in many people's minds the podcaster.
Well, it's not a title anybody's fighting over.
That's true.
It's not like, oh, I'm the number one.
Yeah, I think we'd rather be Stanley Cup champion,
Yeah.
Leo Ford, or Adam Carolla, or, you know,
A few other titles.
the land speed record or something good like that, or maybe an Oscar or an Emmy.
Anything, frankly, would be better than this. So, actually, you're originally a radio guy, broadcaster. You also did the Man Show. You've done a lot of TV. What was it that inspired you to create the podcast? This was what, 2009?
Yeah, I was let go from my radio show. The whole year up until the point where I was let go from my radio show, I kept getting these reports where we had millions of minutes of streaming. They would say, well, last month you had 19 million minutes of streaming. And I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, but I knew it was people listening to the show via the internet. And, you know, I went from maybe 100 or 120 markets when I was doing Loveline to 13 or 15 markets when I was doing my morning show. So it made sense to me that people in Boston, for instance, where I had been a fixture on the radio for 10 years, or maybe San Diego, where I'd been on the radio for over 10 years, and now I wasn't on the radio, may have been streaming my morning show. So in a way, but you tell me, you're the expert, we were sort of podcasting before we were calling it podcasting. We were doing a radio show, or we were doing a show that was being consumed via the internet.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't even know what podcasting means anymore. I never liked the word very much because it kind of implied something you put on an iPod. And,
Right.
And it's internet. We're broadcasters, right? It's on the internet instead of a tower.
So,
it's still a show.
Yeah, so I've done my friend Bill Simmons' podcast a couple of times, and my friend said to me, why don't you just keep it going? Why don't you start doing it, you know,
Right.
off the air just because you get fired from your job? And we just started up the following Sunday. Like, it didn't take a
That
week
was easy.
off. Well, it seemed for a guy, and you understand the schedule, for a guy who was getting up at 4:45 in the morning and driving into the Mid-Wilshire district and doing 4 hours of radio, and then, you know, meetings with, you know, affiliate directors and program directors and advertisers and potential advertisers and all that kind of stuff. Well, the idea of sitting where I'm sitting right now, you know, hitting play on a laptop or hitting record on a laptop and doing an hour worth of talking into a microphone with Jimmy Kimmel or Seth MacFarlane or whoever I invited over for a cocktail that night, with no commercial breaks and no live reads and no program directors, it seemed like very light lifting to me, and not getting up at 5 a.m. to do it.
And did you feel like I want to stay on the air in some way? I mean, it was one of those things. I still want to keep doing what I'm doing.
I had this feeling of I've built an audience over the last 15 years of doing radio, and I don't think over the past 15 years I had been off the air for any more than 8 days or something. And I thought, well, I don't want to lose that small army of people that I've built. Number one. Number two, it's enjoyable for me. I like doing this. I like doing what we're doing now, even though you couldn't tell by looking at my face. Talking is something you do. It's enjoyable.
Right.
If you and I went out to lunch, we would go out to lunch to enjoy ourselves.
It'd be just like this.
And it would be just like this, except for I have a nice buzz.
You don't have a buzz?
I have a mild buzz.
Okay.
But I would have a greater one if you and I, especially if you were buying, Leo. So I didn't want to turn it into work. I didn't want to lose my audience. And I also have this feeling that there's a much deeper connection when you're dealing with an audible audience versus a visual audience. And, people say, oh, I relied on you to get me through my crappy job and a horrible boss.
Right.
And I used to listen to you every morning, and it got me through it. And it got me through my horrible commute. Or, I've even had people say, I was going through a horrible divorce and your humor brought me a lot of solace, or whatever situation in their life. Sometimes it's really heavy. Like my sister got cancer and it was really tough. And the laughs that you brought me really made me feel good for that moment, or whatever it was. I thought, for those few people that really give a crap, I want to be there for them. I want to say, I'm not pulling the plug on this if you need it. And, 85% of you will just move right on to Ryan Seacrest or whoever's spinning the next Jonas Brothers effort. But for the small group of you that really do need me, here's how you can find me. I'm going to do a podcast.
And you didn't do it for money because you were still getting paid for the radio show, even though you weren't doing it, right? Were you still under contract?
Yes, I was getting paid until the end of the year. So I had, approximately 10 months to kind of get my crap together. Were you
looking for radio work while you were doing the podcast, or had you given up on radio or broadcasting?
Well, it was a weird thing where the economy turned so horribly that the radio stuff didn't really seem to exist, or at least it didn't exist as we knew it formally. That's for sure. And I also had this, I don't know what you want to call it, misfortune or misdirection of, they told me we're going to fold the whole radio station and everyone's going home, but not you. You're going to New York to work for the flagship station. So for many months, even though I couldn't share it with anybody, I was under the impression that me and my morning show were moving to the flagship station in New York. And it was a very interesting time in my life, because I would talk to people who produced my show and they'd say, oh, me and my husband are looking at a house in Venice. And I'd go, maybe you don't want to squeeze the trigger on that. What's wrong with the apartment? You like your apartment, I couldn't tell anyone the radio show was folding or the station was folding, but I sure also couldn't tell them we were all going to move out to New York in 4 months. So I didn't know what to do. But at the last moment, they pulled the plug on me moving to New York as well. Oh, so man. Maybe they told everyone that. Maybe they told, Frosty, Heidi, and Frank, and Tom Likas, and everybody else that we're getting rid of everyone but not you, so don't worry about it. You're going to New York. That would kind of be the way to do it, because otherwise, they may burn the whole building down. But it turned out I was out of work, and I just went back and looked it up just out of curiosity, on the plug was getting pulled on, I think it was maybe the 17th of February, 2009, and on a Friday. And on a Wednesday, I had signed a deal to do a sitcom pilot, to star in and create a sitcom pilot on NBC or CBS, I think it was, just literally Wednesday of the week before, or the week of getting fired. So I had that, and then I got a book deal. And then later on, I got a radio deal that was, multi-year, multi-million-dollar, not big time $1 million, but it was, a payday for something, in a town where there's no more paydays in radio. There was that opportunity. And by then the podcast had gotten down the road about 1.5 years, and I just decided to stay the course.
That's interesting. So you turned down a real radio job to keep doing the podcast.
I turned down, like 3 years and, I don't know, $1 million a year plus or something, which, those kind of deals don't really go down so much in radio these days.
That's
anymore.
a big deal. Yeah.
But you have to understand, for me, it wasn't like, oh, you're getting rich doing a podcast. I was selling pilots and scripts and writing books and doing live events and live shows. And there was always something around the corner. So, what I did kind of as a performer was I took my portfolio, and, stock guys will always tell you, you have to diversify, don't put all your money in utilities. You have to spread it out, and that way you'll have a better portfolio. And so for me, I was always like, well, radio's good, but you can always do some TV related something, or write a book, or you can do stand up. And there was all these different entities, and that's what sort of kept me afloat. I didn't make $1 million doing one thing anymore. I made $1 million doing 5 things.
Was part of it controlling your own destiny too? I mean, having your own thing?
Yeah, that was part of it, but I never, I was lucky enough to have my career in radio start on K-Rock and do Loveline. And Drew and I worked in the middle of the night, basically, and nobody really bothered us. And because our ratings were so good everywhere, in every market we were in, we didn't get hassled. I've always said to people,
that's so unusual in radio.
Well,
but if you're a success, you can do that.
Yeah, I've always said to people, the only reason I ever wanted ratings is to be left alone.
Right.
Like, when your ratings aren't good, you have to have a lot of meetings. There's a lot of chefs in the kitchen. There's a lot of people trying to wrap their mind around it and figure it out. And when you're adding a market a week and #1 everywhere you're at, honestly, I didn't even know what our ratings were. We were just #1. Like, I didn't even know what cities we were in. People would call Loveline, and I'd say, where are you calling from? And they'd say, Idaho. And I'd say, we're on in Idaho? And they'd say, you've been on in Idaho for 6 years. And I'd go, oh. And then I'd always apologize to the program director, because that must sound horrible to have someone on his station. I have no idea he's on his station. And it's been, in some cases, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, I mean, I remember, being on, starting off in San Diego, and, some getting to Boston and getting to, WHFS and then in Washington, D.C. And then after that, I just kind of stopped. I just stopped counting. I didn't know where we were on, and they wouldn't tell us either. They just keep selling it to different places. But it was wildly successful, and we were on, in the middle of the night. There was no one around. The program director wasn't hanging around his office, and we just blissfully, I just did my radio. No one ever said a word to me.
Isn't that nice? Glenn Rubenstein is a big fan, is in our office, is telling me that the college kids loved Loveline so much that in the very earliest days of MP3s, they would trade MP3s of the show. This is in the mid-90s on Kazaa and these other networks. So you really were podcasting probably before you even knew such a thing existed.
Yeah, it was weird, and yeah, the kids obviously were hip to the computers before I was, for sure. And yeah, they would sort of collect and trade and start their own fan sites, and even now they're Loveline fan sites where people just archive it and listen to it and do it. And I'm flattered because I had no idea that I would be involved with something that had that kind of longevity. So for me, it was easy. And then I did the Man Show and other shows like that, Crank Yankers, and other shows that Jimmy and I produced and created. And we didn't get hassled too much with that either, because we created and basically, if we weren't technically producing them, we were producing them, and we were the talent. And, at a certain point, I think Jimmy even took the producers and told them they weren't allowed on the set of the Man Show.
That's awesome.
They were screwing things up. So we always had a ton of autonomy, and I had a ton of autonomy. And so when people say, oh, well, you're getting into podcasting, so you don't have to have the man breathing down your neck and the suits and all that kind of stuff, I never really had a lot of that, and the little that I did, I never listened to them.
Right.
So it wasn't really an issue.
But you've made a living as a bad boy, but that's what's interesting. I mean, if somebody buys Adam Carolla, they're buying the bad boy, so it's nice. You there's nothing to, you can't disappoint them.
Yeah, I never look at myself as anything other than I have ideas and opinions, and I just want to share them. I don't think too much about them. I don't try to shape my career, sadly.
No, that's great.
Yeah, just it's good or it's bad or it's indifferent. I don't know what it is, but I never thought about changing my name, and I never thought about a persona. I just thought about
this is me.
Talking. Yeah.
You were according to Wikipedia, you were in the Groundlings.
Well, I was a student at the Groundlings. Okay. I never made it into the Groundlings.
You studied improv, though.
I did, and it was a very good base. And I went all the way through the school until they decided to not make me a Groundling. But
thanks.
In that process, I learned a lot, and I did learn a lot about the very basics of improv and really how to conduct myself.
Improv's really valuable in radio and just performing in general, I think. Live performing, the kind of performing you do.
You, my friend, just hit upon one of the 3 ground rules of the Groundlings, which is yes and.
Yes and.
And not only that, but. So.
We're improving right here, man. We're just.
Yeah, no, when you would do a scene with the Groundlings, they would say, all right, begin the scene. And then you would walk in and someone would say, hey, man, didn't we go to high school together? And then you'd go, I've never seen you before in my life. And then some fat Jewish chick from the back of the theater would yell, stop. You know him, idiot. Now continue.
There's no improv if you say, no, I don't know you. The scene dies. You got to say yes, and not only that, but I dated your sister.
Your sister.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So you wanted to be a comic? What were you thinking?
I was thinking I hated construction, which is what I was doing. I hated my life.
You were building closets with Christian fundamentalists. What? Something like that?
Close enough. I was doing everything. I was doing earthquake rehab work. I was building houses. I was installing custom closets. I was working at cabinet shops. I was working at Euro cabinet shops, which are all on the metric system. I won't bore you, but
I'm bored already.
yeah, I won't bore you anymore. And that's all I did. And I didn't like it, and it didn't pay very well.
Yeah.
And I used to listen to morning radio. It's funny. It's always funny how people do that thing where they go, you know, I've told this as much to like guys like Dennis Miller, where, you know, they've said, you know, who inspired you? You know, who did you look up to? What made you want to be a comedian? And I said, well, not Dennis Miller, because I would watch Dennis Miller do a half hour or an hour comedy thing on HBO, and I would go, well, there's no goddamn way I can do that. There's no way. But I would listen to Mark and Brian in the morning here on KLOS while I was swinging a hammer in Simi Valley, and I would think, well, hell, I could do that. So I was actually inspired by people who weren't as good as other people.
We're bad. I can do that.
It was part of like, you know, just low self-esteem meets, you know, I didn't watch Michael Jordan take off from the free throw line and jam the basketball and go, that's what I'm going to be doing. You know, it was more a guy hit a 4-foot set shot and me going, I think I could do that if no one was in my face. And so I would listen to morning radio guys here in Los Angeles, and I would go, well, hell, I could do that. And that's what inspired me. But I still had no idea what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, you may as well go to the Groundlings and learn the craft of improv and how the basic bones of it and the structure of it. And I mean, it couldn't hurt. And so that's where I started.
And then how did that become a radio? Tell me the story. How did you get into radio?
Well, I did that for the Groundlings, and then at a certain point, they just tell you, you know, your money's no good here anymore.
You're done.
You should leave. And, you know, they're sincere about them not believing in you by saying, put your checkbook away.
Oh, boy.
It's time to leave.
Oh, boy.
There'll be no more.
Did they really think you were no good at it?
No, they didn't think I was no good at it. They thought I was good. They just have choices. It's like we can only, you know, there's 16 people in your class. We can select 3 or 4, right, and we think this 3 or 4 are better than you. Now, you know, Tom Brady had a lot of guys get picked in front of him too, and there's always those stories when you go look at the draft and you're like, Todd Blackledge got picked 25 picks before Dan Marino? What the hell? Well, at the time, they thought Todd Blackledge was a better quarterback. And they all agreed. You know, you know what I mean? The experts got together and they went, we want him over him. That's what happened. Are you ever
are you driven by the idea to prove them wrong? Like, I'm going to show them.
No, I don't. I never think about that at all because I believe they were sincere in what they were doing. Like, they weren't trying to inflict punishment on me. That's what they believed. And then secondly, I do believe at the time they were right, which means, and people need to understand this concept, and I don't think they fully do sometimes, which is my name was Adam Carolla, but I was not the person that I was 5 years into hosting Loveline when I was 27 years old and doing the Groundlings. I was simply was not as good. I wasn't as seasoned. I wasn't experienced. They would have been taking a chance on a guy who seemed to have some chops, but they were right at the time to pick the people they picked ahead of me because at the time they were better. Now, 5 years later, maybe I was better than the people they picked, but it's not up to them to figure that out.
Right. So how did you figure out how what I mean, basically on the radio, you rant, you go off. It's not exactly like stand-up. How did you figure out that style? How did you figure out what you were going to do? Was there a moment when that came to you?
No, what happened was I used to just kind of do it in regular life,
You
eating
just talk.
meals, driving with people, complaining about other drivers, going off on these things. And it was, mostly met with shut up or who cares or quiet down or no one's listening. My family was wildly unsupportive and my friends were not supportive at all. And no, I work construction, people's a lot of shut up, who cares, finish nailing off that drywall. No one wants to hear what you're complaining about. So at a certain point, I got out of the Groundlings. I went into another group called the Acme Theater. I worked with the Acme Theater group for a number of years. I was one of the founding members, so they couldn't boot me out. I was the legacy. I was grandfathered in. And after about 3 or 4 years of doing the Acme improv troupe, I realized that it wasn't my calling. It was something I, could do, but should I be doing it? There's a little bit of a double-edged sword of being sort of good at a lot of things. It's easy to get caught up in doing something that you can get by at, but that you might not be excelling at. Back to Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan wasn't a bad baseball player. He was just a really good basketball player, and he should have been playing basketball. Could he have gotten by in baseball? Probably, but we wouldn't know his name if that's all he did. So sometimes kind of being good at something else in a way will screw you up. Like if Madonna was kind of good at driving a forklift, we might not know who she is today because she could have chosen that path,
Right. Would have been a mistake, probably.
It would have, but the fact that I was sort of a comedian who was sort of not really a stand-up and not really an improvisational guy and not really a writer and not really an actor sort of meant that I could kind of do all of them, but not all of them that well.
So is it Jimmy Kimmel who discovered you?
Yeah, it is. I discovered him, however, but
he was just a nobody on the street.
Well, he was a nobody doing sports at K-Rock. He was Jimmy
the sports guy, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I had recently left the Acme Theater just because it ran its course for me, and I just realized I don't know what I'm doing here anymore. I've been doing sketch and improvisational comedy for 6-7 years now. I'm not Sacha Baron Cohen. I'm okay, but I'm not making any money. I don't know. I'm not going to be on Saturday Night Live. At the time, that was about all there was. There wasn't all these comedy networks, and I don't know what I'm doing here. And I got out, and I just got back into teaching boxing and swinging a hammer and trying stand-up open mics, things like that. Really,
so you were you were teaching boxing?
Yeah.
Did you box competitively?
Yeah, in the Golden Gloves, but not as a professional.
That's very cool.
And yeah, it was fun. And I was working at a gym, and I built an entertainment unit, and I was delivering it to a customer on the west side. And I was driving over Laurel Canyon, and I heard Jimmy on the radio talking about a sports story. He got into an argument with Michael, the maintenance man, and it was one of those morning stunt things. I don't know if it was planned or not. It's so funny to this day. I've never asked Jimmy, was it spontaneous? I always just assumed it was spontaneous, but he started talking, and Michael, the maintenance man, took offense. And next thing you know, there was a fight, and they challenged each other to a boxing match. and they needed trainers and equipment and so on and so forth. And so I was the guy who volunteered to train either Jimmy or Michael. It didn't matter to me.
Well, you'd never think about getting into radio that way.
No.
It's not a career path you'd kind of recommend.
Probably less than 40%, maybe even the 30s, maybe even the low 30s. Yeah.
So you and Jimmy hit it off, so to speak?
Yeah. I met Jimmy. I showed up at the radio station. I wasn't supposed to train him. I just showed up at the radio station, and I got in, and I just waited by the elevators because I couldn't get into the station itself was closed because it was 7 in the morning or something. I just waited by the elevators, and some guy eventually was going in, and I said, I mean, somebody worked there. I said, can you tell the morning guys that there's a boxing trainer just waiting out by the elevators? And I didn't say who to send out. I didn't even know what either one of them looked like or who they were, really. And I just stood out by the elevator.
Wow.
And 20 minutes later, Jimmy just came down the hall. And it was very casual. He just said, I'm Jimmy. I said, I'm Adam. I'm a boxing trainer. He said, all right. I said, I'll train you to box. He said, fine. I said, when do you want to get started? He said, how about today, about noon? I said, fine.
This is so weird.
Okay.
This is the weirdest.
I said, all right. Where do you want it? Where's your gym? I said, it's in Pasadena. I said, okay. I gave him the address. You know, I didn't even have a cell phone or anything. Like, I just probably wrote it down on a piece of paper and gave it to him. And he said, I'll see you at noon. And I said, see you then. And that was it. We just started hanging out, and we were just inseparable after that.
That's awesome. That's great. You still work with him sometimes, or no?
Yeah. I mean, as much as we can. I mean, he's busy taking over late night.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. As often as we can hang out, we hang out.
You ended up playing a character, a cranky woodshop teacher called Mr. Burcham on that show.
Yeah. That was, Jimmy said, when we were done with the boxing, after about 3 weeks, we didn't have that much time together. He said, well, I want to get you on the radio. I said, I am so dying to do comedy, something on the radio.
Oh, that's great.
Dying. Yeah, and he was like, I want to help you because I think you're funny, but I don't know what you do. And I said, well, I hang out and I crack wise. And he said, well, that's what Kevin and Bean do. So they don't need you for that.
We got somebody who does that.
We got 2 guys who we pay to do that. And I said, well, all right. And I said, well, I don't know what else to do. And he said, well, you need to come up with a character.
Oh.
I said, I don't really do characters. And he said, well, you should start. So come up with a character and figure it out and we'll get you on Monday morning. And that was like a Friday afternoon. And I concocted this character, Mr. Burcham, the woodshop teacher. He taught remedial wood at Louis Pasteur Middle School in Monrovia. And he was calling into the show. And I knew the character well because it was all the horrible woodshop teachers I've ever had and shop teachers in general. And I knew about the topic. I knew wood very well because I was a carpenter. So I put this guy together, and he became a huge success, like an overnight hit. I don't even know how it works. I don't know how it would work today. But next thing you know, I got signed by William Morris.
Wow.
And all sorts of crazy stuff just off this character that I would do, twice a week on the morning show.
Wow. That's a very unusual way to get. By the way, who won the fight, Jimmy?
No. Michael.
But he obviously didn't hold that against you. Did you remember the first time you met Drew?
Yeah, the first time I met Drew, I was on Loveline as a guest.
Oh, interesting.
Mr. Burcham was a guest on Loveline. Mr. Burcham was so popular that they booked him as a guest on Loveline back before there was affiliates.
That's
So,
amazing.
Yeah, it was funny.
You're lucky you didn't get typecast as this guy. You could have ended up being Mr. Burcham today.
Well, you know, it was a decision I made early on because everybody loved Burcham.
Did he talk like you?
No, I mean, yeah, well, Jimmy says he talked exactly like me, but he sounded like Burcham, who later on did some Crank Yankers episodes and things like that. He would go like, listen, the nailing schedule on that shear wall is all effed up. Now you asswipes, instead of using 8-penny sinkers, use 10-penny ring shank next time, would you? We're not building a goddamn piano here, people. Let's pick it up. This dude's kind of gruff kind of version of me. And so he got popular. And he got so popular that at a certain point, they wanted Mr. Burcham to host Loveline.
Wow.
And I said to the program director, Kevin Weatherly, I had a meeting with him, and he said, I think we want you to host Loveline as Mr. Burcham.
Wow.
And I said, yeah, that would be like a Pee Wee Herman kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't think that's going to work. That's it's 2 hours a night every night, and it's hard on my voice. And he said to me very seriously, though, he said, look, here's my problem. We know Mr. Burcham is funny. We don't know if you're funny. So it's one of those radio things.
How'd you convince him?
It was this.
We like this Burcham guy. I don't know about Adam. I don't.
Yeah, that's really what it came down to.
That's so funny.
It is. Seems kind of surreal now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anybody in radio has had that conversation in some form or fashion.
Sure.
It's not unusual. So you're going to keep doing the podcasting? I mean, you got a lot of. I know you and Drew were doing a live stage show, and you might be bringing Loveline back. That's what I hear? Is that true?
No, we were doing a kind of like reunion show for the fans that kind of missed us. We're doing a podcast that's Adam and Drew, and we do it a couple times a week. Drew does a podcast on my network. There's lots of other TV things and book things and some movie things, and there's all sorts of things, but it all begins with the podcast for me. So
who would have thought that, huh?
Yeah, it's a weird thing, although I've always been that way in the sense that I did the Man Show, I did Loveline on MTV. I did Crank Yankers. I've done a lot of stuff that was on TV, and I never had to do radio. Probably 2 years after I started doing radio, I probably could have quit radio and then just work on the Man Show and other projects. And I never did. I always did radio and then whatever other TV shows, projects, or whatever I did simultaneously. But I never stopped doing the radio.
Why is that? Do you feel like radio is who you are?
Well, yeah, for me, I do. I feel like it's there for me, the hardest thing is when there's some vacation on a Monday or something and I go 3 days, I find myself with, a notepad just filled with notes, things I wanted to talk about and discuss and get to. I walk around with these buck slips and these cards and these notepads, and it's a constant. When I take my dog for a walk, I don't leave without my little pen, and then I've got all these things I want to share and these ideas, and I got these plans, and I have these takes and opinions, and I just there's not much room for that in TV. Writing books, I've written a few books, and those are great, but it's a completely different process. And this is so immediate. And, and then we started doing live podcasting, and you're there at these theaters and these clubs, and there's 500 people in the audience, and you're doing a live, impromptu 90-minute show. I feel like we're doing something that's not been done before. I mean, we travel around and sell out comedy clubs, but we do a podcast.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
We don't even know what it is. We don't have an app.
Yeah.
So it feels very interesting and satisfying to me, but it also feels like the nucleus. Like, you want to sell books, keep that podcast going.
Right.
You want to get your Kickstarter program going with your new movie, keep that podcast
Tell
going.
me about that. Is this a sequel to The Hammer? What is this new movie?
I'm just writing another comedy, and it's got elements of The Hammer in it, I guess, because I'm writing it and I'll be starring in it. And it was just one of these things where I did The Hammer 6 or 7 years ago, and people want to know why I haven't done a movie in between. And I've sort of been like, I haven't wanted to do a movie in between, or haven't had an idea. If you say, I'm going to do a movie a year every year, you're going to do a lot of shitty movies.
Right.
You're just going to.
Right.
But if you go, I'm just going to hang around and do a movie when I have a good idea for a movie, then you'll do 2 movies every 10 years, but they'll both be pretty good movies. Or at least movies you wanted to do.
So is this Road Hard?
Yeah, this is a new movie that it basically went through this in my own life and career, where I thought about the fact that all these comedians, including people like myself, were forced to go back on the road and do comedy in their 40s. Ugh. And, mid and late 40s, after everyone did stand-up so that they could get on TV.
Right.
And the second they got on TV, they turned their back to doing stand-up. And then the TV shows went away, and maybe they got divorced, and maybe they went through rehab. And now there's a bunch of comedians. You would recognize a lot of their names. I mean, a lot of them are, household names, and they're going to do, 1 show Thursday night, 2 shows Friday, 2 shows Saturday, and 1 show Sunday night at the Addison Improv in Addison, Texas. Ugh. And, it holds 231 people, and they got to spend 4 or 5 days in Texas, in Addison, Texas, at a Ramada Inn. And these are a lot of names who guys had big time TV shows and stuff, 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
And they had holding deals and development deals, and it's all gone now. And all it is these guys going back on the road, and they're miserable. And that's kind of the story that I want to tell.
Glenn says it sounds like The Wrestler, but with stand-up comedy.
It basically is. I mean, you think there's something sad about a 55-year-old guy getting hit with a folding chair. Yeah. That same guy standing up on stage, telling jokes from 30 years ago, kind of sad too.
So is that on Kickstarter? I don't see it on Kickstarter now. Are you going to put it on Kickstarter?
Yeah, we have a really cool video coming out, and we're just sort of putting the final touches on it. And we're going to put it up there and see if we can raise some money.
I bet you will. I bet you will.
Nice.
It's interesting because when you said about the comics saying, I want to make it in TV, I think a lot of people do podcasts because they either aren't making it in TV, or they want to make it to mainstream media. It's an entry point. You're kind of the opposite. I'm kind of the opposite. We are embracing it as a medium all of its own, and I think that's kind of exciting.
I do too, and you know, for me, it's independent. It's autonomy. I work with people I like working with,
and you're making a pretty good living. That Mangria is selling like crazy.
Yeah, we sold probably 100,000 bottles of Mangria, and we don't have any real distribution yet. Just most of it at just buymangria.com. Well, people like it, Leo. They like to drink.
I've had it. It's not good. I'm sorry.
Now we got to send you the white. You're a lightweight.
The guy who makes it for you is just up the road a piece. He came in and said, we could make something for you, too.
Oh, you should make something.
I'm 100,000 bottles. I'm missing the boat here.
Yes, you're missing the booze boat.
But the booze boat.
You know what? I'll get you the peach pear white.
No, please.
You'll like that.
Oh,
You'll
God.
like that much better.
Well, I think we have some left over. This is, how old is this?
A couple months.
Couple months old. This is still good. That's the beauty of it. It lasts forever.
You got to pour it over ice. You may need a little splash of 7-Up in there, Leo. I think you're lightweight.
Woo! So you can get that at buymangria.com. Adam's podcast on every day. The car show a couple of times a week.
Yeah. The other shows are all just sort of weekend shows, Thursday shows, Dr. Drew shows. You can go to adamcarolla.com if you want to find out.
Thank you, Adam. Our show is heard every Wednesday around about, 3 o'clock, 3:30 Pacific time, 6:30 Eastern time. That would be 30.5 plus 12, 15, 30 plus 7, 22:30 UTC. Next week, Douglas Rushkoff. That's going to be very interesting. We've got some great guests. Pardon me?
Next week is
2 weeks for Douglas Rushkoff. Next week is who? Gavin Andreessen. Mark's little brother. No. If you can watch live, too, we love it if you do. I pay attention to the chat room. I ask questions based on the chat room. But if you can't, of course, on-demand audio and video available after the fact at twit.tv/TRI. Thanks to Karsten Bondi, our producer, for booking so many great guests. Thanks to you for joining us, and we will see you next week on Triangulation. Bye-bye.